Hello and welcome to Fighting 15s and Gladiator Miniatures. In the last video I showed you how I ink figures ready for photography, and today I'm just going to show you the basic setup I use for taking photographs of those figures. The basic piece of equipment is one of these light tents which you can get off Amazon, eBay. This one is Capulot's photo light box. It's basically a cube lined with reflective foil and with a backdrop. It comes with a variety of backdrops, none of which are useful apart from the white one. All the others are usually too textured to be of any use, so I use the white one to help reflect light around the box, which is the basic requirement here, because you want a nice diffuse light for taking photographs. I'm going to point up at the top of the tent, and you can see there's a diffusing layer of cloth which comes with the tent, and there are behind that two strips of LEDs. Now these are oriented front to back so that more light comes in from the front than comes in from the back, because the figures are going to be positioned near the back on that little box, and we want as much light to hit the front of the figure as possible. On some figures with a lot of overhangs you won't get good illumination from one of these, you really need even more lighting, but for most general purpose figure photography this setup is fine. It is possible in some boxes to set the lights up so they go side to side. That will put one strip of light towards the front and one strip directly over the figures. I think that I've tried that, and for me it didn't give us good results because there was too much light coming behind the figure and I wasn't getting great exposure. So here we are. There's a little bit of art paper here, blue curved behind the figures. This helps for cutouts later, apart from on blue figures where you really need a different colour, or you need to fudge it a bit when you come to editing the photograph. But I use blue because I use a graduated blue to white background in photographs, and if you do that, the little halo of bluishness around the figure when you cut it out in Photoshop or any art program blends with the background, so it doesn't show obviously. So here you are. So that's the box. There's a little I use a little cardboard box for putting the figures on to raise them up level, and then come out and I can see my camera, which is a Nikon compact camera, but it's a compact camera with all the knobs on basically, because I can use it to set a manual exposure setting or aperture or shutter priority. It's a good few years old now, and it's permanently plugged into the mains because the battery doesn't last particularly long and I need to keep it going. But as you can see, I've currently got it set to A, which is aperture priority, and for this box I'm just going to turn the lights up to full inside. I have an exposure, you can see, of 1/60 of a second at f7.7 and +1 on the exposures. Now an f-stop is basically aperture and provides your depth of field, so the higher a number the greater your depth of field, and the more in focus you get at macro level on a camera. The shutter speed is just 1/60 of a second. Because I'm running on aperture priority, the camera is set to 1/60 of a second to give it what it thinks is perfect exposure, and trial and error tells me that it needs +1 on the exposure compensation to give the right level when you eventually get it round to a camera. It looks slightly too bright on the back viewfinder of the camera, but once it's ported to a computer it looks fine. So the camera's set up in macro mode. and we got a figure ready. And here we are to the left. We have all the figures I did yesterday ready for photography. They're all neatly sort of piled on the little bags with their identification number, and I will take them off in turn and put them back in turn, so that when I come to try to identify them later I can still do so. Yeah, so that's the basic setup. I can't think of anything else, but yeah, this flap here, because I want to maximise the reflected light into the light tent in a minute, I will shut that down so that reflects. The bottom flap, obviously I need to keep open so the camera has access basically to the box. And I've got the camera set up so it's low and shoots the figure virtually flat on. We're taking pictures for a commercial standard for a website, and to show them at their best and in proportion, you basically need to shoot them square on as much as possible rather than top down. Common fault with a lot of photographs of figures is they're shot top down. It changes the proportions of the figure and just doesn't show what the figure's like to your customers. So that's why I basically shoot with a tripod, and I basically adjust the height of the camera using that column, and basically try to keep everything as square on as possible to the figures. The camera is set so the telephoto lens is at maximum manual level and in macro, so I'm shooting from as far away as possible basically with a telephoto lens. It's very hard to get the camera very much closer to the tent, and I'm trying to throw light onto the figure from the lights up top, so I need the figure at the back of the tent. So the only way of getting the figure big in the frame is to use the telephoto option on the camera. Right, so that's it. I'm going to have to now try to get this to work in a tripod, so bear with me. Okay, this won't show particularly well because there's a lot of glare coming from the light tent, but what I'm going to do is just walk through what I do. Flap is down, the figure is approximately central in the viewfinder, and I'm just going to test where focus happens, and I've got little brackets which show that it's really pretty well on the figure itself, on the main part. So I'm fairly confident that the autofocus system is going to snap the figure and it will be in focus. It's easier shooting groups of figures in odd numbers because the camera will inevitably try to focus on the middle figure. Depending on how your camera's set up for focus mode. So the best way of shooting figures in ones or threes or fives. Fives, it gets quite wide, so threes is about the maximum. So what I tend to do for a lot of figure codes is shoot each figure individually and put them together as a composite in an art package like Photoshop. So now I know the figure is central and it will focus, I'm going to set the timer to 10 seconds. Okay, the reason for doing this, I'm just going to focus, then press and wait for it to count down to take a photograph. The reason for giving it a timer exposure is so that everything has time to settle down after taking the photograph. And so there's no motion. That's why I'm using a tripod for the main camera in the first place, and why everything is rock solid-ish. So giving it 10 seconds to settle down means any vibration you may have introduced into the photograph when you've pressed the button or taken your hand away from the camera is reduced to a minimum. 10 seconds is frankly quite enough. The only thing you can do in between that to muck it up is to accidentally hit the tripod, which, believe me, happens quite a bit. Right, so that's that figure. I know that exposure will work. In practice, if you're setting this up yourself for the first time, you will have to do trial and error depending on your camera's settings. To determine which is the right exposure for you, depending on the light levels from the tent. So I'm just positioning. I position the figure at the back of a little box in there as a constant, because all these figures are mounted on little 20mm plastic bases, so they should all be the same distance in from the back of the box. So there we are. Right, okay, we'll take a look at this one in a bit more detail. You can see there that the figure is central, what the settings are, and 10 seconds focused on the figure, and leave it. Handheld photography in low light is not good, so this will be very, very wobbly. Okay, and that's it. And I'm now just going to repeat that for the 55 or so figures that are there, and then I'll hopefully be able to show you what happens to them all in Photoshop. Thank you very much.